A stray dog jumps on Officer Caroline Navarro's car and asks her to take her puppy home, but what happened next will absolutely melt your heart. After a grueling double shift, Caroline thinks she's heading home for a quiet night. But when a desperate street dog appears in the pouring rain, frantically pawing at her patrol car, Caroline realizes this isn't just any ordinary rescue call. The trembling mother dog leads her through flooded streets to an abandoned farmhouse where one dying puppy waits in the shadows. With communication down and rising floodwaters threatening their escape, Caroline faces an impossible choice. She must risk everything to save this fragile family, carrying them through treacherous waters where one wrong step could mean disaster. But this isn't just about survival, it's about a bond so powerful it will change everything. Will Caroline's courage be enough to save them all? And what will this desperate mother's trust teach her about love, sacrifice, and finding hope in the darkest moments? The rain drummed steadily against the windshield as Officer Caroline Navarro signed off her radio for the final time that shift. Her shoulders ached from 14 hours of patrol, and her eyes burned from the strain of navigating through the evening's persistent downpour. The police station's parking lot glistened under the amber streetlights, puddles reflecting the weary glow of a day finally coming to an end. Caroline pulled her patrol cap lower and quickened her pace toward her car, eager to escape the relentless weather. The quiet suburban streets beckoned, promising the sanctuary of home, a hot shower, and perhaps a decent meal. She had been looking forward to this moment since noon, when the calls started piling up and the rain began transforming the roads into treacherous waterways. Now, at last, she could retreat from the demands of duty and find some peace in solitude. As Caroline started her patrol car and pulled out of the station, she noticed how the rain had transformed the familiar neighborhood into something almost ethereal. The empty streets seemed to shimmer under the streetlights, and the usual bustling energy of the area had given way to a serene, almost magical quiet. She drove slowly, mindful of the slick roads, when something caught her eye in the rearview mirror. A dark shape moved between the parked cars, barely visible through the rain-soaked windshield. Caroline dismissed it initially, assuming it was just her tired mind playing tricks after such a long day. But then, without warning, a medium-sized street dog appeared directly in front of her car, its eyes wide and desperate, water dripping from its soaked fur. The dog didn't dart away as most strays would. Instead, it jumped onto the hood of her patrol car, pressing its paws against the windshield with an urgency that made Caroline's heart skip. Caroline immediately pulled over to the curb, her training kicking in despite her exhaustion. She reached into the back seat for her police jacket, the thick material still warm from the car's heater. Through the windshield, she could see the street dog's pleading eyes, intelligent, desperate, and somehow human-like in their intensity. The dog wasn't aggressive or frightened. It was communicating, as if it understood that Caroline was its only hope. She cracked the window slightly, and the dog whimpered softly, a sound that pierced through the rain's steady rhythm. "Easy, girl," Caroline whispered, recognizing the maternal desperation in the animal's posture. The dog's teats were swollen, indicating recent nursing, and her ribs showed through the wet fur signs of a mother who had been sacrificing her own needs for her offspring. Caroline's heart ached as she realized this wasn't just a lost dog. This was a mother in crisis. The rain continued to fall, soaking both of them as they studied each other through the glass barriers. Without hesitation, Caroline opened her car door, and the street dog immediately jumped inside, shaking the rain from her coat. But instead of settling down, the dog became more agitated, pacing in the small space and whimpering continuously. She moved to the window, pawing at the glass and looking back at Caroline with those same desperate eyes. It was clear the dog wanted to go somewhere specific, somewhere urgent. Caroline had never encountered an animal that communicated so clearly, so purposefully. "What is it, girl? What do you need me to see?" she asked softly, though she knew the dog couldn't answer. The street dog's behavior intensified. She would sit, stare directly at Caroline, then move to the window and look in a specific direction. Her message was unmistakable. Follow me. The dog's urgency was infectious, and despite her exhaustion, Caroline felt compelled to trust this remarkable animal's instincts. She had learned over her years in law enforcement that sometimes the most important calls came from the most unexpected sources. Caroline turned the patrol car in the direction the dog indicated, leaving behind the familiar suburban streets for the darker outskirts of town. Her flashlight lay ready on the passenger seat, its beam a faithful companion through countless night shifts. The street dog pressed her nose against the side window, occasionally looking back to ensure Caroline was following her guidance. They drove through neighborhoods that gradually became more sparse, where streetlights grew fewer and the pavement gave way to gravel roads. The dog's agitation increased with each mile, her whimpering becoming more urgent. Caroline's radio crackled occasionally with distant communications, but she was now in an area where coverage was spotty. The rain had intensified, making visibility challenging, but the dog's certainty kept Caroline moving forward. She had patrolled these outskirts occasionally, but never in weather this severe. The landscape felt different in the storm, more isolated, more mysterious. Whatever this dog needed her to find was out here in the darkness, waiting. The headlights illuminated an abandoned farmhouse emerging from the gloom, its broken shutters and overgrown yard testament to years of neglect. The street dog became frantic as they approached, jumping from seat to seat and pawing at the door handle. Before Caroline could fully park, the dog had somehow managed to push the partially open door wider and leaped out into the rain. Caroline quickly grabbed her flashlight and followed, her boots splashing through the muddy driveway. The farmhouse loomed before them, its windows boarded up and porch sagging under the weight of decay. Paint peeled from its weathered siding, and weeds had claimed what once might have been a garden. The dog ran to the front door, which hung slightly ajar, and looked back at Caroline with an expression that seemed to say, "Hurry!" Caroline approached cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The dog slipped through the partially open door and disappeared inside. After a moment's hesitation, Caroline followed, pushed by an instinct she couldn't quite explain. Inside, the beam of Caroline's flashlight revealed a scene of abandonment, dust-covered furniture, scattered debris, and the musty smell of dampness and decay. The wooden floorboards creaked ominously under her weight, their protesting groans echoing through the empty rooms. The street dog had disappeared deeper into the house, but her urgent whimpering guided Caroline forward. As she moved through what had once been a living room, her flashlight caught glimpses of a life, interrupted family photos scattered on the floor, children's toys forgotten in corners, furniture covered in sheets that had become gray with dust and time. The dog's cries grew more desperate from somewhere toward the back of the house. Caroline followed the sound, her heart racing with anticipation and worry. Whatever had brought them here was in the shadows ahead, and the dog's increasing desperation suggested it was a matter of life and death. The house seemed to hold its breath around them, waiting. Caroline's flashlight beam swept across the far corner of the room and stopped. There, huddled beneath an old wooden chair, was one tiny mixed-breed puppy, barely visible in the darkness. The small body was fragile and still, and for a terrifying moment, Caroline thought she might already be too late. The mother dog rushed to the puppy immediately, licking its face frantically and whimpering with a sound that broke Caroline's heart. She knelt down carefully, extending her hand toward the puppy. It was alive but barely cold, wet, and so weak it could hardly lift its head. Its breathing was shallow, and the small body trembled uncontrollably. Caroline immediately pulled out her cell phone to call for emergency animal assistance, but the screen showed no signal. The storm had knocked out cellular coverage in this remote area, leaving them completely isolated. The mother dog looked up at Caroline with eyes full of trust and desperation, as if she knew that Caroline was their only hope for survival. Time was running out, and Caroline realized she would have to act alone. Caroline gently lifted the puppy, wrapping it in her warm police jacket to protect it from the cold. The tiny body felt so fragile in her hands, and she could feel its weak heartbeat against her palms. The mother dog stayed close, never taking her eyes off her baby, occasionally licking Caroline's hands in what seemed like gratitude. The rain outside had intensified to a torrential downpour, and Caroline knew the journey back to town would be treacherous. She carefully cradled the puppy against her chest, feeling its shallow breathing and praying it would survive the trip. The mother dog followed closely as they made their way back through the abandoned house and out into the storm. At the patrol car, Caroline arranged the emergency blanket from her trunk to create a warm nest in the back seat for the puppy. The mother dog jumped in beside it, immediately beginning to clean and comfort her baby. Caroline started the engine and began the desperate race against time to reach the animal shelter before it was too late for the fragile family she had been entrusted to save. The first obstacle appeared just 2 miles from the farmhouse, a section of road completely submerged under rushing floodwater. Caroline stopped the car and stared at the churning water, her heart sinking as she realized the main route to the shelter was impassable. The rain continued to pound the roof of the patrol car, and she could hear the puppy's weak whimpering from the back seat. The mother dog looked at her with those intelligent eyes, seeming to understand the gravity of their situation. Caroline considered her options. She could wait for the water to recede, but that might take hours the puppy didn't have. She could try to find an alternate route, but the back roads were likely even worse in this storm. Or she could attempt to cross on foot, carrying the puppy to safety on the other side where the road resumed. The floodwater was moving fast, filled with debris from the storm, and the current looked strong enough to sweep someone away. But as she looked back at the weakening puppy and its desperate mother, Caroline knew she couldn't abandon them now. The choice was terrifying, but it was the only choice she could make. Caroline carefully lifted the puppy, securing it inside her jacket to keep it as warm and dry as possible. The mother dog whined anxiously as Caroline opened the car door, understanding instinctively what was about to happen. The rushing water was shockingly cold as Caroline stepped in, immediately soaking through her boots and chilling her legs. Each step forward was a battle against the current, which seemed determined to knock her off balance and sweep her downstream. The puppy remained quiet against her chest, its tiny form barely stirring, which worried her more than if it had been crying. Debris floated past branches, garbage, and unidentifiable objects carried by the flood. Caroline focused on each step, testing her footing carefully before committing her weight forward. The water rose to her knees, then higher, making each movement more difficult. The mother dog followed, swimming alongside Caroline with powerful strokes, never straying far from her baby. Halfway across, Caroline realized there was no turning back now. The partially submerged log appeared just as Caroline's foot slipped on the muddy bottom, and she lurched forward dangerously. Her free hand shot out and gripped the weathered bark, using it to steady herself before she could fall and potentially harm the puppy. Her heart pounded as she realized how close they had come to disaster. The log became her lifeline, allowing her to rest for a moment and catch her breath while the current raged around her. The mother dog swam up beside her, pressing close as if offering support and encouragement. Caroline looked down at the bundle in her jacket. The puppy was still breathing, still fighting for life. That gave her the strength to continue. Using the log for support, she carefully maneuvered around it and continued toward the far shore. Each step was agony as the cold water numbed her legs and the current tried to steal her balance. But the thought of the trust the mother dog had placed in her and the precious life depending on her courage drove her forward through the treacherous water towards safety. Lightning split the sky above them, illuminating the flood in stark, terrifying detail, and revealing just how far Caroline still had to go. The thunder followed immediately, so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath the rushing water. The storm had reached its peak fury, and the rain fell so hard it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Caroline pressed the puppy closer to her body, trying to shield it from the worst of the weather. Her muscles ached from fighting the current, and her legs were becoming increasingly numb from the cold water. But she refused to give up, drawing strength from the mother dog's unwavering presence beside her. The street dog's determination was infectious. If this brave mother could keep going, then so could Caroline. The lightning struck again, closer this time, and Caroline counted the seconds until the thunder. The storm was directly overhead now, but she was more than halfway across. She had to keep moving, had to get this baby to safety. The shelter was waiting somewhere beyond this flood, beyond this storm. Caroline's muscles burned with exhaustion as she fought through the deepest part of the flood, where the current was strongest and most dangerous. The muddy embankment on the far side seemed impossibly distant, and several times she nearly lost her footing on the slippery bottom. The mother dog continued to swim beside her, occasionally nudging Caroline's arm as if to encourage her or help guide her through the treacherous water. The puppy had grown alarmingly quiet, and Caroline feared it was weakening further with each passing moment. Every step required tremendous effort, but she forced herself to keep moving. The water began to feel shallower as she approached the far shore, and hope flickered in her chest. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Caroline's feet found solid ground on the muddy embankment. She crawled up the bank, still clutching the puppy, her legs shaking from exhaustion and cold. The mother dog emerged from the water beside her, shaking vigorously and immediately checking on her baby. They had made it across, but the race against time was far from over. Through the sheets of rain, Caroline spotted the welcome sight of the animal shelter sign, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Her patrol car was on the other side of the flood, but she could see lights ahead that meant warmth, safety, and medical care for the dying puppy. She struggled to her feet, still cradling the precious bundle, and began walking toward the building. Each step was difficult on her shaking legs, but the thought of Dr. Amanda Richardson and the medical equipment waiting inside gave her strength. The mother dog stayed close, looking up anxiously at the bundle containing her puppy as they approached their destination. Caroline could see figures moving behind the lighted windows of the shelter, volunteers working late into the evening. Very soon, this tiny life would be in expert hands. The storm continued to rage around them, but ahead lay warmth, medical care, and hope. The hardest part of their journey was almost over. The shelter doors burst open as Caroline approached, and Patricia Chen, the shelter manager, rushed out with several volunteers despite the pouring rain. They had been watching from the windows, somehow knowing that someone in desperate need was approaching through the storm. "Dr. Richardson," Patricia called over her shoulder as she reached Caroline. "Emergency." The volunteers quickly surrounded Caroline, taking the bundle containing the puppy from her exhausted arms and rushing it inside to the medical area. The mother dog followed closely, never leaving her baby's side. Inside the warm shelter, Dr. Richardson was already preparing an examination table and warming blankets. The contrast between the storm outside and the bright, warm interior was overwhelming. Caroline collapsed into a chair, suddenly realizing how much the ordeal had taken out of her. Her clothes were soaked through, and she was shivering uncontrollably, but all she could think about was whether the puppy would survive. Through the medical area's window, she watched Dr. Richardson and her team work quickly and efficiently to assess the tiny patient who had been entrusted to their care. Dr. Amanda Richardson worked with practiced efficiency, her gentle hands examining the puppy while the mother dog watched anxiously from nearby. The veterinary report would later detail its condition: severe dehydration, hypothermia, and malnutrition, but nothing that couldn't be treated with immediate care. "She's going to make it," Dr. Richardson announced, looking up at Caroline with a smile. "You got her here just in time." The relief that washed over Caroline was overwhelming, and she felt tears mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. The mother dog seemed to sense the good news and wagged her tail for the first time since Caroline had met her. Patricia Chen appeared with warm towels and hot coffee, insisting that Caroline stay until she had warmed up properly. As Caroline watched the medical team continue their work, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The dangerous journey through the flood had been worth every terrifying moment. These 2 lives would continue, and that made everything worthwhile. Over the following days, Caroline found herself returning to the shelter after each shift, drawn by an invisible bond to the family she had rescued. The adoption application sat on Patricia's desk, waiting for Caroline to make a decision she already knew she would make. The mother dog, whom Caroline had begun calling Maya in her mind, would perk up every time she heard Caroline's voice in the hallway. The puppy was growing stronger each day, her eyes bright and her appetite returning. Patricia Chen smiled knowingly each time Caroline lingered by their kennel, clearly seeing what Caroline herself was still reluctant to admit. "She's special, isn't she?" Patricia said one evening, referring to Maya. "Dogs like her don't come along often. She chose you that night, you know." Caroline nodded, unable to deny the connection she felt. Maya had trusted her with the most precious thing in her world, and that trust had created a bond that couldn't be easily broken. The shelter kennel gate stood between Caroline and Maya, but it felt more like a temporary barrier than a permanent separation. Maya would approach the gate whenever Caroline visited, pressing her nose through the bars and wagging her tail with genuine joy. It was clear to everyone at the shelter that these 2 belonged together. The puppy was thriving under professional care, and her recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. But it was the bond between Caroline and Maya that had captured the attention and hearts of all the shelter staff. They had been through something extraordinary together, something that had forged a connection deeper than typical human-animal relationships. Maya seemed to understand that Caroline had risked her own life to save her family, and her gratitude was evident in every interaction. Caroline found herself thinking about Maya during her patrol shifts, wondering what the intelligent dog was doing and whether she missed their evening walks through the shelter corridors. The signed adoption papers made it official. Maya was going home with Caroline. The legal document represented so much more than a simple pet adoption. It was the formalization of a bond that had been forged in crisis and strengthened through trust. Dr. Richardson had given Maya a clean bill of health, and all the necessary vaccinations and procedures were complete. Patricia Chen had handled the paperwork with obvious pleasure, knowing that this was one of those perfect matches that made her job worthwhile. As Caroline held the adoption papers, she felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. She had never owned a dog before, but she knew that Maya was no ordinary pet. This was a partner, a companion who had already proven her loyalty and intelligence under the most challenging circumstances. The shelter staff gathered to wish them well, and even Dr. Richardson took time from her busy schedule to say goodbye to the remarkable dog who had orchestrated her own rescue. The moment Caroline opened Maya's kennel for the last time, the dog launched herself into her new owner's arms with pure, unrestrained joy. The pet collar, with its new name tag Maya, clinked softly as she moved, a small symbol of identity and belonging that marked her transition from stray to family member. Maya's excitement was infectious, and even the typically reserved Caroline found herself laughing as the dog covered her face with grateful kisses. The other shelter animals seemed to sense the celebration, adding their own voices to the joyful commotion. Patricia Chen watched with satisfaction as the two prepared to leave together, knowing that both rescue and rescuer had found something they desperately needed. As they walked through the shelter doors and into the afternoon sunlight, Maya looked up at Caroline with absolute trust and devotion. This was what coming home felt like. Not a place, but a person who understood and accepted you completely. Caroline's apartment key turned in the lock, officially welcoming Maya into her new home for the first time. The modest space suddenly felt warmer and more alive with Maya's presence. The street dog explored cautiously at first, sniffing each room and gradually relaxing as she realized this was her territory now. Caroline had prepared by purchasing a bed, food bowls, and toys. but Maya seemed more interested in staying close to Caroline than in exploring her new possessions. They established routines quickly, morning walks before Caroline's shift, evening meals together, and quiet companionship during Caroline's off hours. Maya proved to be an ideal roommate, house-training easily and showing remarkable intuition about Caroline's moods and needs. The loneliness that had characterized Caroline's off-duty hours disappeared completely. Instead of coming home to an empty apartment, she now returned to an enthusiastic greeting and unconditional companionship. Life had changed in the best possible way. The park pathway became their favorite route for daily walks, a journey they shared through changing seasons and weather. During one of these walks, Caroline witnessed firsthand the protective instincts that made Maya extraordinary. A group of children were playing near a busy street when their ball rolled into traffic. Before anyone else could react, Maya had positioned herself between the children and the road, gently but firmly herding them back to safety. The parents were amazed and grateful, but Caroline wasn't surprised. She had seen Maya's protective nature that very first night when the dog had risked everything to save her puppy. It wasn't just instinct, it was intelligence, compassion, and an innate understanding of responsibility. Caroline realized that Maya didn't just have protective instincts. She had a calling to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. This wasn't simply a pet. This was a partner with a purpose, a companion who understood service and sacrifice in ways that most humans could never comprehend. As the sunset painted the horizon in brilliant oranges and purples, Caroline and Maya sat together on their favorite park bench, reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them together. The storm that had once threatened to separate them forever now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of companionship and the security of belonging. Caroline understood now that rescuing Maya had ultimately rescued herself from a life of isolation and emotional distance. Maya had taught her about trust, courage, and the transformative power of unconditional love. Their story had become a testament to the unexpected ways that heroes can enter our lives, sometimes in the form of a desperate mother dog on a stormy night. As they walked home together, Caroline knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The sunset behind them marked not an ending, but a new beginning filled with endless possibilities.